There is a fatal flaw in the modern corporate hierarchy, a blind spot that executives practically nurture. They believe that power resides in corner offices, leather chairs, and the ability to sign paychecks. They forget that the modern business is a digital organism, and the people who truly hold the power are the ones who build the nervous system. The invisible architects in the server room. Push them too far, and they won't just quit. They will dismantle your empire from the inside out, using the very tools you forced them to build. This is the story of a company that thought they could exploit a legal loophole to squeeze free labor out of their sole IT guy, completely oblivious to the fact that he possessed the digital skeleton key to every secret they had. Meridian Logistics was a sprawling, gray-carpeted purgatory tucked into an industrial park in Mississauga, Ontario. The company moved freight, managed distribution channels, and processed thousands of purchase orders a week. For years, their digital infrastructure was held together by digital duct tape. Dispatch used one archaic software, inventory used another, and payroll operated on a proprietary system that looked like it was coded during the Cold War. Transferring data between these silos required an army of clerks manually exporting CSV files, a process that bled time and money. Enter Kalen. Kalen was the senior half of a two-man IT department. He lived in the glow of dual monitors, surviving on stale breakroom coffee and the quiet satisfaction of making broken things work. When upper management finally decided to drag Meridian Logistics into the 21st century, they tasked Kalen with researching and implementing an enterprise resource planning system, an ERP. He recommended a colossal, all-encompassing software suite called Aegis. Aegis was a beast. It swallowed every disparate system Meridian used and consolidated it into a single, omniscient database. Purchase orders, vendor delivery times, warehouse inventory, payroll, human resources, Aegis tracked it all. A receiver on the loading dock could scan a barcode, and within milliseconds, a sales rep on the third floor could see the updated inventory count. Aegis didn't just record data, it recorded behavior. It knew exactly when an employee logged in, what modules they accessed, how long they lingered on a screen, and the precise second they logged out. After 15 minutes of idle time, Aegis would automatically boot the user, logging a strict timestamp. For 6 grueling months, Kalen practically lived in the server room. He built the architecture, migrated millions of rows of legacy data, and dragged a reluctant workforce through endless training seminars. His colleague, a methodical family man named Tarek, handled the daily hardware tickets while Kalen wrestled the ERP into submission. Eventually, the dust settled. The system hummed. The executives marveled at their new streamlined dashboards, blissfully ignorant of the blood, sweat, and thousands of lines of code it took to build them. Then Meridian decided to expand. They opened distribution networks in Atlantic Canada and the Pacific Northwest. Suddenly, the company was operating across 4 different time zones. To the executives, this was a massive win. To the floor staff, it was a logistical nightmare. An email sent at 8 in the morning from a client in Halifax landed in Kalen's inbox at 6:30 in the morning, Ontario time. A frantic shipping error reported at 3 in the afternoon from Vancouver triggered an alarm at 6 in the evening in Mississauga. The workday stretched, warping from a standard 8-hour shift into a sprawling, amorphous grind. Salaried staff began arriving before the sun came up and leaving long after it set just to keep their heads above water. Kalen caught the brunt of the chaos. He would walk through the glass doors at 8 in the morning to find 3 department heads hovering by his desk, arms crossed, demanding to know why a server glitch reported at 6:15 hadn't been resolved. His phone would vibrate in his pocket at dinner time with frantic calls from West Coast sales reps locked out of their accounts. Upper management, spearheaded by an operations director named Vance, decided the solution was simple. Expand IT coverage. Vance summoned Kalen and Tarek into his office, a sterile room reeking of expensive cologne and cheap ambition. Without looking up from his tablet, Vance casually announced that their schedules were changing. Kalen would now work from 6 in the morning until 2:30 in the afternoon. Tarek would take the late shift, arriving at 10:30 and staying until 7 at night. Tarek stiffened. He had 2 young daughters and a wife who worked evening shifts at a local hospital. He was the one who picked the kids up from school, cooked their dinners, and put them to bed. Working until 7 was an impossibility. He explained this calmly, outlining his familial obligations. Vance offered a tight, unsympathetic smile. He leaned back, steepled his fingers, and informed Tarek that the new schedule was mandatory. Meridian was a growing enterprise, and those unwilling to grow with it were welcome to find employment elsewhere. Tariq didn't argue. He walked back to the IT cavern, packed his mechanical keyboard, his framed family photos and his ceramic mug into a cardboard box and walked out the door. Overnight, Kalen became the sole IT technician for a multi-provincial corporation. The workload crushed him. Aegis was powerful, but it required constant maintenance. New hires needed training. Dispatchers needed their permissions tweaked. The Vancouver office needed their hardware configured remotely. Kalen's ticket queue ballooned from a manageable 20 to a staggering 150. He was arriving at 5:30 in the morning and rarely leaving before 6 in the evening. The bags under his eyes deepened into permanent bruises. Management promised they were looking for Tariq's replacement. They posted the job online, but Kalen saw the salary they were offering. It was insulting, $20,000 below market rate for an ERP specialist. Weeks bled into months. No one applied. Exhausted and furious, Kalen marched into Vance's office and demanded a resolution. He laid out the numbers. He was doing the work of 3 men. He wanted a substantial raise, or at the very least, he wanted to be paid overtime for the extra 30 hours a week he was bleeding for the company. Vance chuckled. It was a dry, scraping sound. He opened a desk drawer, pulled out a printed copy of the Ontario Employment Standards Act, and slid it across the polished mahogany. He tapped a manicured fingernail against a highlighted paragraph. Information technology professionals, the document stated, were exempt from the overtime provisions of the law. Vance looked up, his eyes gleaming with bureaucratic triumph. He explained that Kalen was an IT specialist on a fixed salary. Legally, Meridian Logistics didn't owe him a single dime of overtime, whether he worked 40 hours a week or 80. Furthermore, a raise was out of the question until the next fiscal year. Vance suggested Kalen manage his time better if he was feeling overwhelmed. Kalen stared at the highlighted text. The sheer audacity of the loophole felt like a physical blow. They had him backed into a legal corner and they knew it. They were perfectly content to let him drown, using the law as a shield. Kalen didn't yell. He didn't threaten to quit. He simply nodded, slid the paper back across the desk, and walked back down to the server room. The cold air of the basement washed over him. He sat in his ergonomic chair, staring at the blinking cursors on his dual monitors. He opened the Aegis interface, the system he had built, the system that watched everything. An idea began to take root in the dark corners of his mind, a cold, methodical spark. The Ontario labor law exempted IT professionals, yes, but it did not exempt administrative staff. It did not exempt dispatchers. It did not exempt warehouse receivers or junior sales representatives or customer service agents. In Ontario, any salaried employee who was not a manager or supervisor was legally entitled to time-and-a-half pay for every hour worked over 44 hours in a single week. And for the last 3 years, Meridian Logistics had been operating under the assumption that a salary meant unlimited free labor. They had forced their non-management staff to absorb the brutal hours of the cross-country expansion without paying a single cent of overtime. Kalen opened a blank SQL query window. His fingers flew across the mechanical keyboard, the sharp clacks echoing in the quiet room. He instructed Aegis to pull the exact login and logout timestamps for every single user in the database. He wrote a script to filter out anyone with a management or executive title. Then, he set the parameters. He wanted the daily active hours for every remaining employee cross-referenced week by week, going all the way back to the very first day the ERP system went live. The database chewed on the massive query for nearly 10 minutes. The cooling fans in the server racks roared, then the results populated, row after row of data, thousands of lines. Kalen watched the numbers scroll by, feeling a grim smile spread across his face. Dispatchers logging 55-hour weeks, receivers clocking 60 hours, customer service reps routinely hitting 50. The sheer volume of unpaid, legally mandated overtime was staggering. It wasn't just thousands of dollars, it was hundreds of thousands, possibly millions. Kalen didn't just have proof. He had an airtight, mathematically flawless, server-authenticated ledger of Meridian's wage theft. He didn't act immediately. Revenge, like good code, requires careful execution. First, Kalen updated his resume. With his mastery of Aegis now a proven fact, he landed an interview with a massive tech firm in Toronto within a week. They offered him a senior position, a massive pay bump and ironclad work hours. He signed the contract silently. Then he scheduled a meeting at a dimly lit diner smelling of grease and filter coffee, with an aggressive, highly rated employment attorney named Elias Thorne. Kalen slid a redacted sample of the data across the Formica table. The lawyer's eyes widened as he reviewed the numbers. Thorne confirmed the legal standing. The data was a goldmine. He gave Kalen his explicit permission to act as a referral. Kalen drafted his resignation letter, giving the standard 2 weeks' notice. Vance accepted it with a sneer, confident that the IT market was saturated and Kalen was making a mistake. The next 14 days were a masterclass in quiet compliance. Kalen documented his processes, organized the network cables, and ensured the servers were running flawlessly. Friday arrived, his final day. At 4:55 in the afternoon, Kalen packed his desk. At 4:58, he wiped his personal data from the workstation. At 4:59, he opened his mail client. He had spent the previous night writing a simple script. The script generated individual, highly personalized emails for every single non-management employee in the company. Attached to each email was an Excel spreadsheet detailing that specific employee's exact login and logout times over the past 3 years, neatly calculating the exact number of overtime hours they had worked past the 44-hour legal threshold. The subject line of the email was simple: "You are legally entitled to overtime pay." The body of the email contained 3 brief sentences. It explained the Ontario labor law regarding salaried workers. It stated the exact dollar amount the company owed them based on their current hourly breakdown. And finally, it provided the direct phone number and email address of Elias Thorne, employment attorney. At exactly 5 o'clock, Kalen pressed enter. 140 emails left the outbox simultaneously. Kalen stood up, grabbed his jacket, and walked out of the server room. As he rode the elevator up to the ground floor, he heard the faint, collective chime of 140 notification bells ringing through the cubicles. By the time Kalen reached the glass front doors, the silence of the office had shattered. A low murmur rose from the sales floor, quickly escalating into a cacophony of gasps, angry mutters, and chairs scraping against the floor. People were standing up, staring at their monitors in disbelief. Kalen pushed through the revolving doors, stepping out into the crisp evening air just as he heard Vance's voice echoing down the hallway, demanding to know what was going on. The fallout was catastrophic for Meridian. By Monday morning, Elias Thorne's office switchboard was practically melting. Almost every single employee authorized Thorne to represent them in a massive collective negotiation. Meridian Logistics tried to fight it, but they had nothing to stand on. Their own ERP system, the flawless digital panopticon they had paid Kalen to build, was the star witness against them. The timestamp data was irrefutable. To avoid a public class action lawsuit that would have destroyed their reputation and brought government auditors crashing down on their heads, Meridian settled. They were forced to write massive back pay checks to nearly their entire workforce. The financial hemorrhage wiped out the executives' bonuses for the year, drained their expansion capital, and nearly bankrupted the Canadian division entirely. Vance was quietly terminated a month later, ousted by a furious board of directors. All Meridian had to do was pay one exhausted IT technician a fair wage for his extra hours. Instead, their greed cost them everything. Never underestimate the person who builds your infrastructure. They know exactly where the structural weaknesses are, and if you push them hard enough, they won't hesitate to pull the linchpin and watch the whole thing collapse. If you enjoyed this story of digital retribution, hit that subscribe button. Drop a comment below telling us about the worst boss you've ever had and stick around. We've got plenty more stories of corporate karma coming your way.